Welcome to a very special conversation about the end of year for the cannabis industry in 2021. With me today is a very special guest as well, Dan Ahrens, who is the Managing Director and Chief Operating Officer at AdvisorShares Investments. Dan manages the AdvisorShares Pure Cannabis ETF and the AdvisorShares Pure US Cannabis ETF. Dan, as always, thank you so much for your time.
Well, thanks for having me on. Good to talk to you.
Dan, let's start big. 2021, a year of a lot of ups, a lot of downs for the cannabis industry. But right away, your initial takeaway, what's one word or one phrase that you would use to describe the year?
Oh, that's a tough question. I guess I'd have to say painful. How about painful? But I want to give a little more color on that. So as you said, we manage two cannabis funds. One's more of a global strategy, that's the ticker YOLO. The other one's the U.S. only strategy. The ticker is MSOS or MSOs. So the year started off with a lot of excitement, even a lot of hype, if you want to call it that. After Biden won the White House, and then we had a runoff election, and Democrats supposedly gained control of Congress, and a lot of politicians do what politicians do, and they make campaign promises. They say things they're planning on doing, and in reality, it might not be true. So yeah, cannabis started with a big run up in January and February, following a run up in the fall of last year, and then and even some of the Canadian names. And we can talk about that a lot more, but the Canopies and the Tilrays and the others of the world that get to list on NASDAQ or the New York Stock Exchange. So a lot of people, look at those as a play on cannabis, even though those companies don't do business in the United States for marijuana business. They're scratching and clawing to get in the United States, doing CBD and other things, but no, they can't do THC marijuana business in the United States. So those stocks even ran up more than U.S. operators, kind of inexplicably. It's not right. The U.S. operators, are forced to list on secondary Canadian exchanges, trade OTC in the United States. They don't get the same amount of volume, the same amount of liquidity. And so January really marked a high point, and things dragged from there. People were saying buy the dip, and but then the dip kept going, 8 months and counting. And I'm going to digress here, but I wrote about this in my book. I wrote the book Investing in Cannabis, and I talked a lot about extreme volatility. And I gave a lot of case studies about how volatility just doesn't mean ups and downs in one day or 1 week or 1 month. It can drag on for quite a while and be very painful. So now I'm talking to you in November, and we've seen some new news about some Republicans dropped a new federal reform of cannabis bill. I never like to use the word legalization because it's not full legalization. And it gave people, again, a lot of hope that not that this bill is going to get passed in its current form, but that we're getting it from both sides of the aisle now, and it's a big step in the right direction of reforms that we're expecting. And I'll say that with 8 months of pain and drawdowns in cannabis stock prices, there's been a big separation between company performance, between the actual financials, revenue growth quarter over quarter and year over year, versus a stock price, that the U.S. operators in particular have become wildly undervalued. They needed something to happen at a federal level to give people hope. We saw that. And a lot of people think we're seeing the beginning of the bounce back right now. So I hope that wasn't too long of a winded answer for you.
No, of course.
But it has been painful, but there's light at the end of the tunnel, we think.
I see. Definitely want to ask you some more about what your thoughts may be on this bounce back, and especially heading into the next year. But
Sure.
Dan, we've talked a lot about misconceptions in the cannabis industry, things that investors still maybe get wrong, or you described it with the Canadians and their opportunity into the U.S. Exactly how that plays out.
Yeah.
Maybe what's on your wish list for this holiday? What's one thing that you want investors to really get right when it comes to the cannabis industry, maybe for next year?
Well, there's two things. If you simply look at U.S. cannabis stock prices versus U.S. cannabis stock companies, again, growth metrics, their actual financials, cannabis might be the fastest growing industry at the lowest price industry right now. And I hope it's not too simplistic to say just because the last 8 months have been really painful, really ugly. I don't think I'm going out on a limb too far to say 2022 is going to be a huge year for cannabis and U.S. cannabis in particular. So we're starting to see the beginning of that right now. A lot of people think so. That leads us right into this holiday season. And we're gonna see some actual US reform. I've always said it's gonna come piecemeal, it's gonna come in baby steps. But now there's a lot of public support. I think we're seeing enough support in Congress with this new Republican bill. I think, again, it's not gonna get passed in its current form, but it will lead to everybody coming to some fair middle ground. And there's a lot of worse things I could say right here, and I'm trying to control myself. But I think they'll pass safe banking. We got to see a safe banking passed. Safe banking is going to be a domino effect after that. That's going to open the doors to tax reform of 280E. With banking, doesn't automatically come 280E reform or uplisting to major exchanges, but a lot of people think those additional steps come rather easily after safe banking is passed. Once we have uplisting to NASDAQ or the NYSE or even Toronto of major US operators, we think these companies will finally be valued like other regular companies are valued on the New York Stock Exchange or NASDAQ, or even how the Canadian firms have been valued in the past, which could push up these stock prices, not a little bit, a great, great deal, and a rather flood of institutional money could finally come into these stocks. There's funds like mine and other family offices. We know who the institutional investors are, but it's not the big name traditional institutional investors. These stocks are mainly held by the investing public, by individual investors to a large extent. So floods of institutional money, uplisting, it could be very, very big. I know people that like to use the term generational opportunity, and I can't argue with that.
Before we fully turn the page on 2021, you mentioned a lot of pain. Maybe what was one of your most unexpected surprises or biggest moments of, that you thought a lot of success as in the sector? You've mentioned a lot of the growth that we still see from the US operators that goes a bit undermined by the situation in the country. But
Yep.
yeah, just one thing that maybe you felt like, this is a really good thing that maybe went a bit under the radar, or really took you by surprise.
I don't think I'm going to answer your question really correctly here, but it's an interesting thing to point out. So our fund, MSOS or MSOs, back in early spring, it had its assets up to about 1.2, 1.3 billion, which was nice for a fund less than a year old. Had a lot of interest, and then again it hit its high price points back then, February, March, and drew down a lot more than 50% from those numbers. But here's the interesting thing. The number of shareholders, the outstanding shares of the fund are at an all-time high right now. So prices came down, but we didn't see big outflows of money. So, investors are selling an ETF. That's the beauty of an ETF. They're buying and selling it all the time. We see trading volume. But, if there's more people selling than buying, the market makers or authorized participants choose to redeem the fund. They take money out, the outstanding shares go down. On the opposite, that's how an ETF grows. When a lot more people are buying than selling, the market makers, the authorized participants, create shares. So the term we use is the assets have been pretty sticky. They've been sticky. They haven't had big outflows of money. And that means that people who are invested in this space still believed in it. So our shares outstanding at an all-time high. That bodes really, really well for the future in my mind, because an awful lot of people think these stock prices are going to bounce back. And there's an awful lot of tailwinds to say that. Again, I talked about the pain. People that are used to investing in areas that are new, volatile, like cannabis, really should think that an 8-month, 9-month drawdown is no big deal. Again, that's what I wrote about in the book. Doesn't make it any less painful, real unpleasant, because our darn politicians promised us reform. They told Joe Biden to stand up on the stage and say that he was going to let, cannabis convictions out of jail. He said he was going to deschedule it. He said he was going to do lots of things. It's part of the Democratic Party platform. And then it went into just politicians being politicians and dragging things out indefinitely and playing games with people's lives. Then that really needs something like safe banking.
Absolutely, Dan. Well, heading a little bit back into the business aspect and the volatility of it all,
Yeah.
M&A and the potential path of the will they, won't they of the U.S. Reform has been two of the biggest items for 2021.
Yep.
When you look into your crystal ball, 2022, maybe what are the big themes that you're expecting to see play out throughout the whole year?
Well, there is going to be a lot of M&A. You mentioned that. It's an interesting thing. Years ago, we had Constellation Brands, a big alcohol company, make a huge investment into canopy growth and then make a second, even bigger investment. So they're tied to canopy growth. I don't know if they regret that now. They won't ever admit that publicly, but they've been invested in canopy growth and they're married to it now. And they want U.S. reform as well, because they want their companies to actually be able to get full legal access to the United States. Altria, big tobacco company, made a big investment into Cronos. Cronos doesn't even do much to sell marijuana in Canada. They're basically just they're like a SPAC. They're like a holding company. They are just sitting on their investment, again, waiting for reform more than anything else. But back then, people thought there was going to be a lot more M&A, and it kind of dried up. We saw other companies like British American Tobacco and others do joint ventures and get involved a little bit. But what it really means is those big alcohol companies, tobacco companies, other consumer packaged good products companies, they're waiting. They're waiting on the U.S. Right now, those companies, it's impossible for them to really do merger acquisition of U.S. operators. We see bigger U.S. operators gobbling up smaller operators sometimes. TerraSend did a great deal with Gage. Earlier in this year, Truly, Roy did more of a blockbuster deal getting into Harvest. Great licenses really dominate Arizona gave good access to Pennsylvania. Some people were saying, oh, I don't know if they paid too much, or other people said it might turn out they got a great deal. I think they got a great deal with the expansion in their footprint and moving into other markets. But there's been a number of deals like that inside of the cannabis industry. We're going to see more. Some people are questioning, oh, why aren't people buying up these stocks like crazy, because they're undervalued right now? Well, that's because they're only happening inside of the cannabis space. One company buying another company, well, buying company also has its stock price depressed right now. Again, there's a lot of waiting on the reform that we were promised months and months ago, and we all believe strongly it's coming. Now we think it's coming sooner rather than later. But again, it's going to be a series of dominoes, a lot of things falling into place, and it's going to open up these cannabis companies to real buyout opportunities from consumer packaged goods companies. It could get big. One thing I always like to remind people of, if you try to play the game of picking who's going to get acquired, you're going to lose. They come out of left field. It's too hard to guess. And you always want to own the acquiree. I don't really care about owning the acquirer. Buying Canopy didn't really do anything for Constellation positive. It popped up Canopy's price. Same thing when Altria bought Kronos. Yeah, I want to own the acquiree, not the acquirer. And we're going to see that in the future.
Absolutely. Well, it seems like there's a lot of wait and see in store for next year for cannabis investors. Dan, thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to it, and we'll see what happens in the next year.
Happy to do it again whenever you're ready. Good talking to you.
Absolutely. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to our YouTube channel for even more expert interviews. For the Investing News Network, I'm Brian McGovern, and we'll see you next time.